I still remember the first time I stepped into their home. The air smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken. There was that faint hum of laughter from the dining room. It's the kind of warmth you can feel before you even see the people. My wife. Well, back then she was still my girlfriend, squeezed my hand as we stood at the front door. She whispered, "Just be yourself. They're going to love you." And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The door swung open, and there he was. Her father. Tall, broad shoulders. That kind of handshake that lingers just a second longer than normal, as if sizing you up. But he smiled. That smile, wide, genuine, or at least I thought so. He clapped me on the back and said, "Welcome, son. Your family now." Can still hear it in my head. Your family now. Those words felt like a key turning in a lock. It was late summer, their backyard glowing with string lights draped across the fence. The smell of grilled corn, the sound of kids chasing each other barefoot on the grass, someone's playlist softly humming through a little speaker. I was standing by the grill, helping flip burgers, when he raised his glass and called out, "Now, this is a good man. Knows how to work hard, knows how to treat a lady right." Everyone laughed, clapped. I laughed too, even though I was a little embarrassed. But deep down, I felt proud, like I'd passed some unspoken test. Back. Then everything was easy. Sunday dinners with her family were a tradition. Her mom would make that lemon pie she knew I liked. Her father would pour me a drink before I even had to ask, and I thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Looking back now, it almost feels like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. The warmth, the comfort, the casual kindness, all of it felt so natural, so permanent. I didn't know that those same eyes that looked at me with approval would one day look at me like I was something scraped off the bottom of a shoe, but back. Then there was no shadow over the table, no edge to the laughter, just the clinking of glasses, the smell of fresh bread, and the feeling that I'd finally found a place I belonged. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where the warmth just switched off. It was more like hairline fractures in glass, tiny. It's almost invisible at first, until the right pressure makes them spread. I remember one Sunday dinner, about a year after that first barbecue. We were all seated around the table. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, the usual spread when her father looked at me over his wine glass and said, "So, still working that little job of yours?" He said it with a smile. That same wide, friendly smile I'd once trusted. Everyone chuckled politely. Even my wife. I forced a laugh, told him it paid the bills, took another bite. But under the table I felt my leg bouncing. Not out of anger, at least. Not then. More. Discomfort. I told myself it was harmless teasing. That's just how some people are, right? It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, months before that dinner. We were sitting in their living room, and I'd mentioned my job again, talking about a recent project I was proud of. Her father leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said, "Well, as long as it keeps the lights on, I suppose." I laughed it off, but in the back of my mind I felt something shift. It was such a small comment, but the way he said it. It felt less like humor and more like a needle sliding under my skin. Over the months, those jokes became more frequent comments about the car I drove. The modest apartment we lived in before buying our house. Once he even made a crack about how my wife had married for love, not money. Every time I told myself the same thing, don't make it a big deal. Right. He doesn't mean anything by it. And maybe part of me didn't want to believe that the man who once called me a good man could also be looking down on me still. I noticed my grip on my fork tightening during dinners, my polite smile feeling heavier on my face. And every now and then when the room was filled with laughter, I'd catch his eyes on me. Not cruel exactly, but measuring it was a Friday. Night in late autumn. The kind of night where the air outside bites your skin. The house is glowing warm with candlelight and the smell of roasted lamb. We'd all gathered her parents, her siblings, a couple of cousins. I'd been looking forward to it, actually. Earlier that afternoon, I'd even helped set the table. I remember adjusting the silverware, lining everything up just right. Her mom thanked me, and I thought, yeah, tonight's going to be a good one. The first hour was fine. Laughter, wine pouring, kids running between the adults' chairs. I was halfway through my plate when it happened. Her father was telling some story, one of those long-winded, half-true tales that get more exaggerated every time he tells them. I don't even remember what started it, but somewhere in the middle of his rant, he looked right at me, smirked, and said, "What would you know about that? You're just worthless trash who got lucky my daughter took pity on you."
First, I
Thought I'd misheard him. The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. I heard the clink of a fork dropping mine before I even realized I'd let it go. Everything slowed. The chatter, the laughter, gone, I could feel. My pulse in my ears, a steady, loud drumbeat. My eyes scanned the table, her mother frozen mid-bite, her brother looking away, my wife staring at her plate like it was suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. No one said a word, not even her, in that silence. I felt something snap not. In an explosive way, no shouting, no angry outburst. It was quieter than that. More final. It was like watching a bridge crumble in slow motion. Knowing there's no way to rebuild it, I swallowed hard, pushed my chair back, and stood up. The scrape of the legs against the floor sounded deafening in that room. I didn't look. "Adam?" I didn't look at her. The sound of plates clinking as I set them down on the table. Her mom's soft voice thanking me for helping. Her dad walking past, patting me on the shoulder, saying, "Looking sharp tonight. If you'd told me then what was coming, I wouldn't have believed you." I don't remember thinking about what to do next. It was like my body decided for me, get up. Leave. Don't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The scrape of my chair against the hardwood felt like it went on forever. No one said a word. No one stopped me. I slipped on my coat, my hands shaking just enough that I had to slow down to get the sleeves right. When I opened the front door, the cold hit me like a slap. I stepped onto the gravel driveway, the crunch under my shoes sounding sharper in the quiet night. My breath came out in little clouds, drifting away in the dark. In my head, 100 comebacks tried to form. I could have turned around, thrown his words back at him, told him exactly what I thought. But I didn't. Not because I agreed with him, not because I was weak, but because I knew that no matter what I said, nothing would change. And in that moment, the only thing I wanted was distance from him, from that table, from the silence of people who claimed to care about me. I was 20, standing in my father's garage. We'd been arguing. About something stupid? Money? Probably. I remember slamming my hands against the workbench, my voice shaking, and then just walking out. The air had been cold that night, too. I'd told myself back then that walking away was my way of keeping my dignity. And yet, here I was, years later, doing it again. Different man, same cold air, same heavy feeling in my chest. I walked past the streetlight at the end of their driveway. Its orange glow lit the pavement in a perfect circle, but the rest of the road was swallowed by darkness. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I wasn't going back in. I didn't sleep. I don't even think I tried. I sat in the living room, the only light coming from the dim lamp in the corner. The clock on the wall ticked like it was mocking me, steady, relentless. Every second felt too loud. I kept replaying his words in my head. Worthless trash. It was like they had been burned into me, not just spoken, and the silence from everyone else at that table. It hurt more than the insult itself. My phone sat next to me on the couch. I'd pick it up, scroll aimlessly, put it down again. Instagram. News headlines. Old photos. Nothing felt real. My thumb just moved, as if distraction could erase the weight in my chest. Every now and then, I'd glance at the bedroom door down the hall. She was in there. She hadn't followed me outside earlier. She hadn't called after me. We hadn't said a word to each other since I left the table. Sunlight filtering through the tall windows of the little church, her hand in mine. Both of us smiling like we'd figured out the secret to happiness. She'd said, "I'll always have your back." I'd believed her. God, I'd believed her. Standing there, I thought about how love was supposed to be a shield. But that night, it felt like I'd been left standing in the open, unarmed. I leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling. The rain had started soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the window like a metronome for my thoughts. What did this mean for us? For our marriage? For the family I'd once felt so sure I belonged to? I wanted to believe this was just a bad night. That she'd come out of the bedroom, sit beside me, tell me she was sorry for what he'd said, but the hours dragged on. The door stayed shut. The only voice in the room was the one in my head, asking questions I didn't want the answers to. By the time the first light crept in through the blinds, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg for an apology. I was going to be clear, precise, unmistakable. The night had burned away whatever urge I had to shout back. What was left was something colder, the kind of clarity that comes after a storm. When the air is sharp and still, I made coffee. The smell filling the quiet kitchen. My phone sat on the counter beside the mug, screen black, almost daring me to pick it up. When I finally did, I opened a blank message and started with the first. 1. It wasn't long, just a handful of sentences. Each one chosen like I was setting down pieces in a chess game. I told him I'd heard him loud and clear, that his words didn't define me, but they revealed exactly who he was, and that from this point forward, I would not be at his table again. No swearing, no name-calling, just truth. Then I hit send. The second message was harder. Her. I told her I'd wanted to believe we were a team, that marriage meant having each other's back, that her silence last night spoke louder than his insult ever could. I didn't ask her to defend me. I simply let her know what her choice to stay quiet had meant. Before I hit send, I stared at the words for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, keep the peace. But peace without respect is just surrender. So I sent it. The third message was to the rest of the family group chat. All of them, short and simple. I won't be part of a family where dignity is optional. Take care of yourselves. I didn't expect replies. I didn't need them. I was. In my early 20s, sitting across from an old boss who'd been through more in life than I could imagine, we'd just dealt with a furious client, and I'd wanted to write back a page-long rant. He'd leaned back in his chair, smiled faintly, and said, "Never fight while angry. Win with calm. The loudest voice is the one that doesn't have to shout." I thought about that as I slid my phone face down on the counter. Calm didn't mean weak, not this time. For a while. There was nothing. The phone sat there on the counter, screen dark, coffee cooling beside it. The whole house felt suspended, like it was holding its breath with me. The first reply came from my wife, not right away. A couple of hours later, opened it, half hoping for something, anything that sounded like she cared. Instead, it was short cold. "We'll talk later, but you overreacted." Overreacted. That word rolled around in my head like a loose screw, clattering against everything else I was feeling if that was overreacting. I didn't want to know what she thought fair looked. Like, the group chat stayed silent. No one asked if I was okay. No one tried to explain or smooth it over. They just didn't say anything at all. And maybe that was their answer. By midday, I drained my coffee without realizing it. The cup sat empty beside my phone, the bottom stained with cold residue. I found myself staring out the kitchen window at the bare trees swaying in the wind, thinking how strange it was that you could spend years building relationships and lose them in a single night. It was years ago, early in our marriage. We were at her parents' place, and her brother had made some snide remark about my work schedule. Before I could say a word, she jumped in. "Don't talk about him like that. He works harder than anyone." "I know." Her voice had been steady, her eyes sharp. I remember feeling this rush of gratitude, like this is my person. We've got each other's back. That memory felt like it belonged to someone else now, some other version of us. The rest of the day dragged. No more messages came in. Not from her, not from them. Just an empty house, an empty cup, and the kind of silence that makes you realize the fight is already over. You just haven't left the battlefield yet. She didn't say a word to me until that night. We sat in the living room, no TV, just the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The only light came from the lamp in the corner, throwing long shadows across the floor between us. She sat on the far end of the couch, legs crossed, hands clasped in her lap. I waited for her to start. She did. "I think you made a mistake," she said finally. "Shh. You could have just let it go. He's my father." I felt those last 3 words more than anything else. He's my father, not you're my husband. Not I know what he said was wrong. Just an explanation that told me exactly where her loyalty was anchored. I asked her if she thought I deserved what he said. She didn't answer. She just looked down at her hands and said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." That's when I knew, not just about that night, but about us. This wasn't just a bad moment. This was the truth. Stripped down and sitting right in front of me. If she couldn't stand with me when I was being torn apart in front of her, she never really would. We were younger then, grinning like idiots as we carried boxes into our first apartment. The walls were bare, the place smelled faintly of dust, and the kitchen sink dripped. None of that mattered. We were building something together. We'd sat on the floor that night, eating takeout straight from the containers, and she'd said, "This is the start of forever." I believed her. I built my life around that sentence. Now, sitting across from her in the dim light, I realized that forever had already ended. It just hadn't been signed on paper yet. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just sat there, watching her, feeling this strange mix of grief and clarity. It was over. And for the first time that day, I stopped trying to fight it. I could have fired back. I could have made a scene. Called everyone out one by one, torn apart every excuse they'd been hiding behind. Part of me wanted to, but I knew where that would lead. Another screaming match, another round of twisting words. Another night lying awake with the weight of it all crushing my chest. No, they'd already taken enough from me. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of taking my peace too. So I closed the laptop, the last of their cold, half-hearted messages still glowing on the screen. I packed a small bag, not because I had a plan, but because I was done pretending things could go back to how they were. The blinds were cracked just enough for the sunrise to spill in, painting my hands in a soft gold. It felt like the first light I'd seen in weeks. I was 8 years old, standing in the driveway with a bloody lip after a fight with the neighbor's kid. I told her I won. I'd hit him harder. She knelt down, wiped my face with the corner of her sleeve, and said, "Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do." At the time, I thought she was wrong. Now, I understood this wasn't surrender. This was me taking my life back, one quiet, deliberate step at a time. Distance has a way of clearing the fog. Months have passed since that night, and I can see it all for what it was. Not the sudden collapse of something good, but the final crack in something that had been breaking for years. I live far from their reach now. No tense dinners. No second-guessing every word I say. The silence that once felt heavy now feels like air I can breathe some nights. I still think about the way it all ended, but it doesn't sting anymore. It's like touching an old scar. You remember how it happened, but the pain is long gone. Last weekend, sat around a fire with friends who know me, really know me. We laughed until our ribs hurt, the kind of laughter that makes you forget the time. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized I am still surrounded by people who see my worth without me having to prove it. The tide pulls in and out as I walk. Along the shoreline, my footprints fading behind me, I don't look back. Not anymore.